Thank you. So how does the modern landscape play out in Hollin Hills? So I call your attention to this slide. What you're looking at is an actual photograph of the last house in the subdivision called Mason Hill. That's the house on the right. And the first house in Hollin Hills on the left. This is a real photograph. And what you'll notice is there's no entry sign, there's no buffer, there's no nothing. It is a collision of two styles and maybe even of two philosophies. So let's go through, what did the developer do on the house in Mason Hill? Well, first of all, they cut down all the trees, and then they put the house in the middle of the lot. Then they dragged a driveway all the way up to the rear where there would be a two-car garage, creating a significant amount of impervious surface. And then everything that was disturbed, they planted as grass, and then they threw in a couple of trees. Okay? What did the Hollin Hills house do? What did Davenport and Goodman do? Well, first of all, they carefully looked at the site, and they figured out there's a couple existing trees here that we can save. And so they did. And so they put the house behind those trees. They nestled it into where it had the least impact on the forest. Then they built a driveway. Yep, it's a suburb, gotta have a driveway. And in this case, it is a short wide. It is 2 cars wide, but only 20 feet deep, reducing the impervious impact into the site. And then there was a little bit of lawn that was left, but it appears to me that the homeowner infilled it all with plants, so you get zero lawn. Not to say that there isn't lawn in Hollin Hills, there certainly is, but what I'm trying to point out here is this is a fundamental difference in the attitude toward nature expressed here. The house in Mason Hill sits on the landscape. The house in Hollin Hills sits in the landscape. And another minor point here is the bumper sticker on the car on the Hollin Hill side says, "Save the Bay." The bumper sticker on the car on the Mason Hill side says, "Pave the Bay." Kidding. Just want to make sure you're listening. So you've actually already seen this slide, but what I want to talk about here is at the moment in time when Davenport was doing this development, let's say late 40s, it started in 49, up to the mid-50s, this was cheap post-war production housing. That's what Hollin Hills is. But it was not like any other cheap production housing. Levittown was the way to go. If you look at the Levittown house, you notice a couple things. From a site planning point of view, every house is the same. They're all the same size, same scale. They have a uniform setback from the street, and they're all orthogonal or parallel to the street. If you look at the Hollin Hills house, again, it is nestled behind a couple existing trees, and it is not orthogonal to the street at all. But it's still production housing, and it was still cheap. A fundamental difference in an attitude towards nature. Now, John has already shown you this picture, so I won't elaborate upon it. I'll just say I stole it from him, because we gave a presentation like this about 10 years ago. But I want to continue on the idea of site planning. So the outline in red here is the footprint of Hollin Hills. One of the things you will note if you squint your eyes is it's all green. In some cases, from the air, it looks like a forest. It looks like a park. And that is because not only were trees saved, but more trees have been planted over time. And unquestionably, Hollin Hills is a suburb. It is similar in density to the surrounding ones. But when you look at it, it's so much more green. What does that mean? That means the ambient air temperature is between 5 and 10 degrees cooler on a summer day than it is in the neighboring suburbs. So we're going to look at the attributes of the site. So this is the topography, the so-called hills of Hollin Hills, and yes, there are a couple of them, but there are also some flat tops to them. These are the water courses. Paul Spring is a stream that runs from the north or the top down to the south, and there are a couple of tributaries to them. Do you see those little blue squiggly lines? And did this thing not advance?
It did.
Oh.
Streets.
Oh. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, this is as the streets. Yeah, and so again, you see it is a suburb. It has squiggly roads and cul-de-sacs, just like all the surrounding. But if you look really closely, it's much more attuned to the topography. The roadways pay attention to the topography. And one of the things that I want to talk about here is I believe Davenport did that not only because it was a good thing, and not only Goodman agreed with that, not only because it was a good thing, it was actually cost effective. You had to do less earth moving. You didn't have to remove as many trees. What I would argue here is good ecology equals good economy. I don't know that this is absolutely true, but I know how developers think. And they almost never do anything totally out of the goodness of their heart. It has to contribute to the bottom line. And I believe that this strategy of preserving the trees and the stream courses and the topography was actually less expensive as it was less impactful to the land. And so here's the pattern of houses. And again, if you squint your eyes, it all kind of looks the same, it's the suburbs. But I'm going to call your attention now to the green areas. These are those stream courses, and these became parks. And they're public parks. By public, I mean they're owned by Hollin Hills. The residents here know that because we take care of them. We pay to take care of them, and we volunteer to keep them free and clear. And so here's an enlargement of one of those areas and two of those stream corridor areas. So not only now you understand that you're preserving the vegetation and the topography and the hydrology, but what else do these things become? They become wildlife corridors. And they're beautiful and they're fabulous. And if you live anywhere near here or you've ever walked through here, you're going to see a deer. You're going to see a fox. You know there's raccoons there. You know there's possums there because they're wildlife corridors. And they're connected. That's a very important thing and a very innovative thing. I mean, today, this is not innovative at all, but in 1949, absolutely it was innovative. What did the other developers do immediately around Hollin Hills? They would just bulldoze everything, and they would put those streams in a pipe. So again, Hollin Hills is an exemplar of innovation in site planning. And you've seen this photograph also today. I want to call your attention to, let's see if I can do this without blowing up the world. This house. Mila is going to be talking about this house. She is currently working on a landscape design for this very house here. You can see what it looked like there. And then I also am going to be talking about the Seligman house, which is immediately next door to it. And what I want to call your attention to in this photograph is the fact that the top of the hill, and that's what you're looking at, the top of Hollin Hills, was a farm. So not all of Hollin Hills was wooded. The slopes were wooded. The flat areas had been farmed. So again, if you look, you can see that there's a lot of open space in that photograph from 1956. So they had to plant things. And when you look at the lower image, which I just sort of massage Google Earth to replicate that view, you can see how much more landscape has been installed since then. So the typologies come down to about two things. One is you can either have a house in the woods, which is you build your house and you let the woods envelop it. If you happen to live in an area where it was wooded and those trees are preserved, you just let nature be nature, and you immerse your house in the forest. And it's a beautiful type. Oh, went the wrong way. If you happen to live in an area that did not have woods, well, then you have another design issue entirely if you're doing landscape, and that is what you might call the house and garden approach. And so what are the elements or principles of the modern garden? Oh, actually, no, I want to talk about the three landscape architects. So, so Davenport, to overcome that, the fact that he had to help the new owners to understand not only modern architecture, but what would be the appropriate design response to a modern building. Well, at that moment in time, the only kind of landscape that was being taught or promulgated was parterre gardens. They would have gone to magazines that showed them what Williamsburg gardens looked like. That would have been totally inappropriate. So with each home was offered a landscape plan. That's a pretty unbelievable idea. I can't tell you how many developers I have worked with over the past 30 years, and I've said, wouldn't that be clever? And they said, no, that would cost me money. So the woman in the upper left here is Bobby Seligman. She's 92 years old. She bought her house in 1952. I just showed it to you on the screen. I met with her this past summer because I heard she had a Barney Voigt plan. She still has it. That's what she's holding in her hands. That's the original print of the landscape plan. It is mounted on a board that she's folded in half. She has been implementing that plan for over 70 years. And she's not done. If you look at the inset in the lower left, what she has done is, in red pencil, she's highlighted the plants that she's planted. In the red dots, she still has a few more to go. But the other brilliant thing about the Barney Voigt philosophy, now that she has lived long enough to see it get implemented, is that it's completely made her yard an oasis. And one of the things that hasn't been talked about too much today, but is important, is the relationship of the inside to the outside. That is absolutely a key tenet of these houses, is that the houses are small, and you've heard all these statistics. They're tiny houses. But when you have the landscape that can extend out the view and the feel, and then you extend out with useful areas like patios and decks, then you live larger than it seems. And that is absolutely true in Bobby's house. And then Dan Kiley came along after Voigt died prematurely, and he did about 80 of these plans. And if you don't know Dan Kiley, he became one of the greatest landscape architects of the 20th century. He did Dulles Airport. He did the U.S. Air Force Academy. He did the Chicago Art Institute. He is a major, major figure in landscape architecture. As a young man, he did 80 of these plans. So that's a stunning thing. Now, I'll have to tell you with an asterisk, he didn't do it in consultation with the owners. He did it kind of on spec. He visited the site, he drew a drawing, it was given to the owners, and without the consultation, sometimes it didn't match up with what they wanted. They're brilliant plans, they're beautiful, but not very many of them got built. But what I'll tell you is his particular special sauce that he applied to Hollin Hills was very pure geometries. And I'm showing you here an example of one of the ones that has been recently restored. And they're picking up on that aesthetic of not being afraid to have straight paths and having very orthogonal, articulated geometries near the house. And then if you look at the plan, then things relax as they go away from the house. That was his contribution. And then Eric Paepcke, in addition to Barney Voigt, he went back to this notion of broad strokes and fluid moves, and not planting 2 of this and 3 of that, but planting 20 of this and 40 of that, and extending the landscape to extend from one yard to another. And this is an example of a house. And Frank, this is your dad's house. And I snuck in the backyard and took this picture, and it still has that beauty to it, and it still has the fluidity of connecting one yard to another. So what are the principles of modern gardens? These are in no particular order. But one thing is intentional lines. There are no lazy lines in a modern garden. And if you look here, when you have straight lines, you have straight lines, and they're parallel. When you have curved lines, you have curved lines, and they're concentric. There's no laziness. There's a great discipline to the modern landscape. Outdoor rooms. This is sort of an extension of the idea that you extend your living experience out into the garden, but you shape the spaces. So here, there's lawn. Oh my God, there's turf. Yeah, well there is. In this case, it is purposeful. It is the ground plane. It happens to be lawn, but it is completely enveloped and embraced by shrubs and ground covers and trees. So it isn't like the Mason Hill house where it simply is everything else that's left over. It's purposeful. Flowing spaces, one thing flowing into another in the landscape, that really builds upon the fact that on the inside of Hollin Hills houses, one space flows into another. Asymmetrical balance. This goes away from the Beaux-Arts school of symmetry and formality, and really is derived from both the English Romantic school, but also Japanese gardens, where asymmetry was the way to do it, but you had to achieve balance. And that's what I think you would agree you're seeing here. Layered plantings, the full assembly of all sorts of plants. So what you see here are ground covers and shrubs and minor trees and canopy trees, creating this very rich, immersive landscape. Architectural extension. Literally, the texture 111 plywood becomes the screen wall. Literally, painted the same color. That's important. That's how the architecture becomes the landscape. Landscape as background. This is also derived from both Japanese and the English Romantic school, which is as opposed to the Beaux-Arts school, where you're supposed to look at every single tree, every single plant. This says, no, it's just a background. And what that allows is a certain amount of forgiveness, if you will, for asymmetry and unbalance. And if you look very carefully in this photograph, there's a dead tree there. Okay, well, that happens in nature. And in a modern landscape, it can survive that kind of aesthetic. On the other hand, is if you do want a focus tree, you treat it as an art object, a specimen tree, and then you give it the space it needs to become that sculpture. Minimalism is an offset of modernism. It isn't always there, but it is one of the sort of side paths you might take here. So what you notice here is a very simple palette, very economical palette. There's those 3 wooden benches, there's the 3 trees, there's the, oh my God, English ivy. Yeah, but you sort of make fun of it by carving this sort of river of a path through it and acknowledging, yes, it's invasive, but we're going to have fun with it. We're going to treat it again as a ground plane. Borrowed view. I'm going to call your attention here to, it's hard to see, but in the distance is a tree trunk that's actually in the back of the neighbor's yard. It's 100 feet away, and yet it's part of this view. Again, that is distinctly a Japanese idea. It was appropriated by the modernists, and it makes perfect sense. So what are the elements of modern landscape? Well, there's things like driveways, because it is a suburb, and pretty much everybody has a car. But they've responded in many different ways. The standard asphalt you see here, upper right is porous paving, lower right is a very customized driveway with planting in between. Walkways, you see a variety of materials, stone and precast and even wood, but again in very strong, simple forms. Steps. It is Hollin Hills, so there are steps. Bridges, sometimes to get to the house from the driveway, you got to go over the landscape as it's falling away. So the bridges are seen as extensions of the architecture. Patios and decks, the best ones, again, are seamless. They're attached to the house. They are made of the same material when it can be, and they, in some cases, are even painted the same color. So that, again, the architecture and the landscape speaks with one voice. Same thing with fences here. You see, again, I'm showing you all the good examples, by the way. There's a lot of crappy examples, but these are the good ones, and I'm telling you why they're good. And they're good because they mirror and echo the architecture. Addresses, people have a lot of fun with their addresses. Little modern sculptures. Mailboxes, little mini-me's of Hollin Hills houses, custom mailboxes. Libraries, you gotta love these public libraries. Everyone has these, but a mid-century modern library? Are you kidding me? Yep, got them. Sheds, even things as dumb as sheds, if they're done, in this case, with the same pitch and same roof pitch and same material as the house, they become little sort of pavilions. They're almost like follies in the landscape. Waste containers, well, yeah, we got garbage cans. We don't necessarily want to see them. What if the thing that wraps them is beautiful? Kid stuff, this is my favorite thing of all time. A mid-century modern fairy house? Are you kidding me? I love it. I challenge those of you who live in our neighborhood to find it. It's right out there in plain sight. Because there's a lot of artists, there's a lot of formal art. There's also a lot of whimsical art. How can you have a modern landscape without pink flamingos? You can't. Now I want to talk a little bit about sustainability, because it's a question everyone asks. Can modern landscapes be sustainable? Well, of course they can. I've already talked about urban heat island gain, about tree canopy covers, about wildlife habitat. So when you have a house in the woods, you get habitat. This little Bambi here, this is a photograph I took about 4 months ago while eating breakfast. Bambi walked right up to my window because I'm the animal in the zoo and wanted to share my breakfast. For real. And there's been a very keen interest in native plants and rain gardens and current thinking about sustainable landscape practices. And porous paving has become a new way of thinking about it instead of asphalt driveways. And then finally, I just want to add that it's a little known fact, but Hollin Hills has more green roofs than any other community in Northern Virginia, although not intentionally. And now I'll turn it over to Mila.